Welcome to CONVO, a live stream podcast about the intersection of creativity, art, and new technologies. Each month, we bring you 2 episodes featuring compelling and knowledgeable guests who are at the forefront of these exciting fields. I'm your host, Mark Medito. Let's dive into this episode. Yo, welcome to CONVO episode 6, the season ender episode. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to express my deep gratitude to all of y'all, our supporters, and our listeners out there. Whether you tuned in to Twitch or downloaded our episodes on your phone, your support means a lot to us. As we take a few months off to reflect and plan for the future, we want to make sure that we're delivering the kind of content that you would want to hear. That's why we're always open to feedback and suggestions, so feel free to drop us a line on my Twitter. It's at MarkRedito, MarkRedito, and let us know what you think. And with that, let's dive into this episode. Today, we're diving deep into the world of music and exploring the question on every music lover's mind: what's next for recorded music? From its early beginnings as a coordination tool to the way that we consume music today, music has come a long way over the centuries. But with new technologies and cultural shifts emerging all the time, it's natural to wonder where it's all headed. That's why I'm thrilled to have Bas Grasmayer, a music thinker and innovator from Colors and Music X, joining us today to help us explore what's on the horizon for recorded music. From new ways of consuming music to cultural and technological developments that are sure to impact the industry, we'll be diving deep into what the future holds. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the season ender episode of CONVO. And once again, thank you so much for your support. Bas, welcome to CONVO. How are you, man?
Hello. Damn, I heard Congo. I heard Congo rather than Convo. I was like, what is Congo?
Yeah, Convo. Yeah, man. I mean, I'm really very excited to have you. You've been part of the Songcamp community ever since, man, for quite a long time now. Since Electra, I believe, correct?
Yeah, I mean, just before, that's how and then jumps in with Electra.
That's right. Yes. I remember our initial meeting. Yeah, we were talking about colors and stuff like that with Matthew. I don't know if you remember that, but yeah. Buzz, for people who are not familiar with you and your work, would you mind giving us an introduction, please?
Yeah. So my name is Bas. I'm from the Netherlands, but I live in Berlin. And my background is in music and innovation. So people would generally, outside of Web3 especially, would know me for a newsletter called Music X, which used to be called Music Tech Future with like little X's in between. Which I started 6 years ago, to write about music and innovation on a regular basis. And people in Web3 are maybe more likely to know me from Colors, which is a music brand very well known for its like YouTube channel with kind of showcase formats for like featuring different different types of talents from around the world, and very much not shying away from featuring like lesser known artists. And I was lucky enough to be kind of invited there to work on like themes of community, and we can maybe get into it later, but that's how I ended up in Web3 eventually. And then prior to that, I've spent a long time working in like product leadership for music startups, especially kind of music streaming services, but always kind of like niche or different. So one service was Adagio, which is a classical music streaming service. It's been doing what's Apple Music just started doing with its classical music app for like 7 years or something like that. And then another company before that where I worked was called Swoop, which was a music streaming service out of Moscow, like well represented for us, like former Soviet Union, with originally like the dream to go global. But music streaming is hard. Music is hard. So it didn't exactly pan out that way. But it was really interesting because we got to kind of pioneer a multi-app strategy where it was like we didn't want to build. We had like a one size fits all kind of desktop app that does just everything for everyone, a little bit like Spotify. But on mobile, we thought like the opportunity there is like, let's extend into really specific behaviors and build an app that does like one particular thing really, really well. And then build another app and create like an ecosystem of app and an ecosystem of like different types of subscriptions and things like that. And they can have like lower price points and mix and match. That was the vision there, which was really fun. So, I've always enjoyed being out on, well, I don't know. I was going to say the fringes, but like experimenting and trying to not do what everyone is doing, but see like what more can be done. What is there something that is specific that can be done like really, really well, and then have like a chance to exist. So those things I'm really excited about.
Yeah, no, totally, man. It sounds like your background has always been in music innovation and thinking about things, like you said, like at the fringes or at the bleeding edge, of things, or what's ahead. That's really cool. And I wonder, and this is an aside, since you're now in Berlin, to me, it sounds like Berlin is sort of like a hub of that sort of stuff between like, creative and the arts and also technology. Is that true? Is that how you feel about Berlin?
Yes. I mean, that's what really attracted me to actually move here. Like you have like the culture is so rich in this city. So you'll have like counterculture, which is important to me. I grew up around squats and stuff like that, or not grew up around squats exactly, but like, those were the more fun parties than like going to some kind of sterile club in the city. It would be way more interesting to go party with the punks and to some like hardcore electronic techno, whatever stuff. But also, I like art. I also like fine art. There's like loads of classical music here. Like really a lot. The city is very political. People are very kind of politically conscious, which is great. It's very, liberal. You can really be who you want to be. It's like cosmopolitan. It's pretty green. You can get around like quite easily too. So it ticks a lot of my boxes. Oh yeah. And then of course there's like the tech scene, from like kind of VC funders, startups to like also bigger companies like Amazon is, building a giant tower here, which is controversial. But then you'll have like hackerspaces and stuff like that too. Yeah, and then you have embassies and things like that. So you also have like the whole international diplomatic aspects of things, and which for me has always been interesting too, as someone who's like, I left where I'm from when I was like 20, 21. I've been living in different places. So yeah, like I found home here. So, and I think what you said though is has long been true, because it was also a very easy place. It was very cheap to set up here, and so you had like a lot of room for experimentation.
Yes.
But it's getting more expensive now. So the character of the city is slowly changing, but at least there's like a legacy to build from.
Yeah, and I think that's still, well, I've never been to Berlin, but certainly something that I want to do at some point. Would love to visit you. And it's interesting just to call this out. I don't know if it's just like maybe selection bias, but most of the artists and folks that I interview on this podcast came from DIY underground scenes, French scenes, punk scenes, and there seems to be like a through line with all the folks that I've interviewed so far, with their backgrounds coming from these places where it's, where it's a little less mainstream, which maybe provides like a breeding ground for like maybe, I don't know, out of the box thinking, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so I wonder too if there is a through line, or if you see that through line as well, in terms of like the circles that we inhabit, the spaces that we sort of like gather.
I mean, yeah, like absolutely. So doing web free stuff. I mean, I want to be really vague, but like it's you don't make it easy for yourself. You have to like learn all kinds of new things. Like what does a release look like? You kind of start from scratch and you have to like just go figure it out. And then because it's really early, the scene, like you get a scene because not everyone is into this stuff, and there's like a pretty big moat around like Web3 because of like you have to learn about a wallet, you have to learn about crypto, you have to learn about NFTs,
Right.
you have to learn about like how to do all these different things. So there's kind of this barrier, and it creates something of a subculture. For now, it's a temporary subculture, but I think there's a big subculture around Web3. That also means there's a community there, and you're going to have to work with this community. So I think like the people that have like either a high tolerance or get just really excited by that type of stuff, they're likely also people who maybe have been interested in that in real life, especially like the older ones, because I think a lot of this experimentation, there's just like maybe a little bit less room for experimentation now with like, social phenomena like gentrification and also just the way, the music, the online music landscape looks like. It's very kind of, you have to cater to the algorithm. So, it kind of discourages, the type of experimentation and boundary pushing that maybe you would have before in scenes, but, we can go further into that, for us.
No, totally, dude. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. You're also known to provide spicy takes on things. Like arguably some of it are not spicy. You're just proving a point. And I remember encountering one of your tweets. I don't remember what tweet it is, but the thing that stood out to me was dynamic music, or the changes in recorded music, or the status of like how music is right now and how it's ending. And so I wanted to maybe touch on that. But at a high level, what's about to happen in music? The culture, the experiences, and what is possibly the end game for recorded music? I know it's a big question, but you feel free to sort of like maybe expound maybe on that tweet or introduce the idea.
Yeah. So I think the tweet was, I've been thinking a lot throughout the past 1 or 2 years about something that like Radiohead's Tom York said very long ago. I think maybe around the time that they were releasing In Rainbows. And he referred to Spotify specifically, but I think I always interpreted it as music streaming in general as, let me think carefully, the last desperate farce of a dying corpse, referring to like the kind of gatekeeping recording industry so it's like, why do we need like another thing in the middle? We can build our own, like kind of his point was like, we can build our own stuff to connect with our fans and stuff like that. And I didn't agree at the time because, or at least I didn't have such a cynical view for various reasons, but I don't know if it's worth going into that too much, but lately I've been thinking like, actually, he may have been right. And, if I think about, and the reason why I started thinking about this is about discussions around something called user-centric payments, which is music streaming services. They tend to like pull all the plays and all the money together, and then they send it to the artist depending on like which artist has been played the most. But that means that if you haven't listened to anything in a month, your €10 is still going to go to artists, just nothing that you listened to because you didn't listen to anything. Yeah. And so user-centric payments are about if you only listen to one artist, your €10 should go only to that artist, and not to anyone else. But if you pull it gets like divided according to like the total plays in like in a particular period of time. So there's been a lot of discussion around that and also experimentation. But then, all right, so like follow my train of thought here, but
I will. Yeah.
So there's been music streaming services that were like, okay, we want to experiment with a different type of payment model. I think Tidal called it like direct artist payouts or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. SoundCloud dubbed it fan powers royalties, and then there's been other services doing that. And one challenge with this is that, or then I started thinking about like, how does this change the game for an artist? It's like, well, as an artist, it's not about like the number of plays, it's about like loyalty. People need to listen to you and not to anyone else. Because if they only listen to you in a month, maybe only like one song, you're going to get all of their money. But if they listen to like 20 other artists, in kind of equal amount, you only get like 1/20th. So it's like a typical metric in, subscription services and stuff like that is like average revenue per user, which is like ARPU. And with this, it would be about like, what's the average listening share you have per user? Because that's ultimately what gets you paid, and X the number of listeners that you have. The problem is though, and this I know very well from having worked at music streaming services, if you want to get a music streaming service to work, if you want your subscribers to retain and not churn and cancel their subscription, they need to get like use out of your products. And that is usually very closely correlated with how much time per month do they spend listening? How many, do they use the app daily? Like, do they use the app multiple times a day? So kind of your goal as building a music streaming service is catalog music streaming services. How do I make this relevant in as many moments of the day as possible for this person? Which means you want to start suggesting music and stuff like that. You want to get them to go deep into the catalog, go to playlists, etc. You want there to be always something to listen to, even when they don't feel like listening to whatever artist got them like signed up to that service, for example. And for me, like the conclusion from that is that music streaming and its whole kind of UX, like user experience and the interfaces around it, is very much a consequence from the companies that music streaming services had to have their first conversations with, which was record labels, because they needed catalog. They needed a lot of music in there. And so then they sign these deals. You have to pay like advances, so that you kind of have like a guarantee, like at minimum we'll pay you this much, and that's going to amount to like this much of playback. And if we pay more, then we go by like this and this royalty model or something like that. Which means that like building a music streaming service is super expensive. You have like a really high burn rate of money that just goes directly to music companies, and goods artists get paid in the end, but it means like now you have this catalog that you're paying for and you want to like exploit it as much as you can. So a lot of these services are very much like catalog centric, and they care about the relation between like catalog and listener rather than artist and fan, let alone, fan communities and stuff like that. That's not what the business model is like around. That's not what the interfaces are really centered around. So this is why, if you've been on like music streaming services for a while, you often see like kind of new features popping up, like, oh, what about like live stuff? What about merge? What about tipping? What about, being a like kind of social stuff? But those things never really go into the foreground. They kind of stay in the background of these, catalog services. So thinking about that made me think like, okay, actually, maybe Tom York had a point that he had way more, foresight than young me growing up with internet, thinking like, well, but Tom York is like is also an old guy here. So what does he know? Young arrogance, naive me, on piracy websites and just all the music websites to just have 24/7 music like all the time and, pre-streaming. And I was opinionated. I didn't think he was right, but now I think he was right. And it's like, well, what's the end game of this? Where does this go? How do you move forward from here? We've like, okay, we have all the songs that were on discs and stuff like that. Now they're in a digital service. Now what? There's no further place to really go. I mean, there is, but not in the context of like the recorded music industry as it came about in like the past century. I'm going to pause there to take a sip.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. I think that's good framing. You've outlined how we came here, where we're at right now, streaming, and also the mechanics and the dynamics behind the scenes too, and the incentives, all of these like streaming platforms. Before we get to the end game, and maybe think about what the future looks like, let's go backwards a little bit, to maybe clearly lay the path of like how we got here, in preparation for this podcast, we were jamming yesterday, what does this look like? And you presented sort of like almost like a roadmap of how we got here, starting from the old days of music, by the old days, that's probably like 18th century, maybe early 19th century, where music it has a different context. It was performed, right? I.e., with a group of friends, playing the piano, sheet music, and and these sort of like dynamics are always shifting, right? Like if I play to you, just the two of us, a song, it would be different if we have other folks there too, with like alcohol, and you know what I'm saying? And so maybe let's talk about that, because that was fascinating as a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, one way to get there is thinking about like, what is the biggest change to music in the past century? And I think people will typically say the internet. And I think there, I would say not yet. I don't think that's the biggest change. Not yet. Not to music itself, not to music as like a kind of format or default experience. It will be, because the internet kind of leads the way to having loads of data available for like AI models and stuff like that. We're about to see like a massive change, but let's first go back, as as you gently instructed me to do, and so I think the biggest change to music has been the proliferation of the recording as the default format for music. Not the only, but the primary way for people to experience music. And yeah, as you were correctly saying, so as you were saying, before the recording, if you wanted to hear your favorite song, for example, you're at home, it's like nearly dinner time, you're waiting, I don't know, maybe with like a sibling, you want to hear your favorite song. Well, there's no play button. It hasn't been invented yet. So you need to do it yourself, and you need to, discuss which song do we want to can you sing this song or can you play this song or whatever? And then maybe you do it together. And it means that, kind of the default experience of music was very different. And like some of the changes are that, it was always contextual. So it was somehow like relevant. It was, it sounded like what that room sounded like. It sounded like what the participants were bringing in as energy. It was not, unlike a recording, which is going to sound exactly the same every time. It varied. It was, maybe it adapted a little bit. It was, social and participative, by certain defaults where, so you didn't have the records consumer relation, or you didn't have the creator consumer, relation where it's like, no, you sit down and listen. Here's like a record and you're going to listen to it. And maybe you can dance to it. And that's also a form of participation, I guess. But like that became like maybe the more primary form of participation, with the records.
Sorry for interrupting you. Just to maybe add on to that a little bit, would you also say that this is maybe the birth of publishing and composition rights, PROs, and all that stuff, where, or not really at this point?
No, well, yeah. So actually, when we were jamming yesterday, there's so I like when I'm in a room full of like music industry people, and especially music industry people who are thinking ahead. There's a story that I really like to share because it's humbling and it's kind of, how to say, it's a good framing for what is our relation as a industry or with technology and innovation. And it's about pianos. So pianos were really expensive. They were hard to build. And then I think at some point in the 19th century, it may have been slightly earlier, there were some innovations in metal casting. And this made it easier to build these metal frames that go inside a piano that's have to kind of withstand the tension of the strings that you, I don't know, line in a piano or place in a piano. I don't know what the exact terms are for that, but because of like metal casting, suddenly pianos could be cheaper. So suddenly you saw all these kind of more affluent middle class households that were like, we want a piano, because that was something like aspirational. That was something that had been for kind of richer people, and they were like, we want to be seen as such. We want to be part of that, so we're going to get pianos. And that then in turn really helped the publishing industry, because they were printing sheet music and these pianos needed sheet music. So then you get like, publishing industry as kind of the primary thing you would think about is when you say music industry, probably 100 years ago or so, or up until about 100 years ago. Anyway, so it's not like, we're not metal casting. I mean, most of us aren't. That was happening completely from outside of music. So I mean, we can get into that maybe a little later, but I think the fact that there's these like technological things and then it's about like, what do we do with it? And the people that do stuff with these innovations, they're usually artists, because they're the ones asking questions and they're experimenting. And that's why I think a Web3 space, for example, a lot of the innovation is so artist driven, because artists are like, well, what if I want to be able to do this, or I want to be able to do that. How can I do that? And people are like, oh, we never thought about that. That would maybe be sick if that was possible. And I think this is also why you see so many companies, and I'll cut there, but like, where you see so many companies really lean into creative communities and Web3 space to kind of understand better what do we need to build. So I know in the case of Songcamp, you've been like working with zero X splits, and you've been working with Zora and like present material. You can find the links in the show notes. I guess.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
that
Thank you.
if not, but yeah. And it was, similar then, but I think like musical or like music industry tends to think that the innovation of technology has to come from like inside of it. And that's just not how things really tend to go. It's like completely unexpected technological triggers, like metal casting, that suddenly creates like publishing, as a major kind of vertical in that space. And how do you see that? How do you predict even that type of stuff? Yeah. So this is why I think we should be very humble especially when we talk about like futures.
No, totally. And I think what's coming up for me is this sort of like symbiosis between technological innovation and advances, and how that informs creative expression and also culture and ways of experience, and they sort of like go hand in hand. I think that example that you just shared about this iron thing that is like on pianos, and how that was invented, actually made the production of pianos much more efficient, and therefore we can make more pianos, and that in turn maybe inform or influence the creation of the publishing, I say like industry, where okay, the publishing industry is like, okay, how we make money off music would be to print out these sheets, notation sheets that people could play in their pianos in their living room, and so I think that that's a great sort of like maybe like grounding point for this. And then, as we move forward to the present, there's all these macroeconomic factors, and also like geopolitical stuff that happened along the way too. Like yesterday, you were saying that World War II was a huge turning point, in both culture and economy. That's where I would say post World War II is where consumerism bloomed. The economy is now mostly capitalist. And you gave that example about cigarette companies, like introducing this narrative of like women's empowerment.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that? Yeah.
Yeah, because and where I'm going with that, maybe so people can maybe pay attention or start connecting the dots, but it's about the role of recorded music in relation to the listener, to the consumer, and how recorded music very much started to play a role as a consumer good, rather than just as culture. And then I say like post World War II, but like kind of from the 50s onwards or so, when you really started to get like record players and stuff like that in every house. But yeah, where that's part of like kind of consumerism can be traced back to not traced back, but there's like a really good example, a pretty early example of how we started to change the relation between like consuming things because we need it, but making it also about like consuming things because we want to express something. And this is where we're talking about cigarettes. And actually, if there are listeners who've watched The Century of the Self by Adam Curtis, super cool documentary series, they'll be familiar with this example. But it's I think it was like in the early 1920s, cigarette manufacturers, they were trying to figure out how do we sell more cigarettes, and practically everyone. Their whole market, everyone was smoking. So they were like, how do we sell more cigarettes, or what do we do? And they enlisted a what is now considered like the inventor of PR, of public relations. Back then it was called propaganda, propaganda not being the kind of dirty word that it has become. And called Edward Bernays. He was related to Sigmund Freud and also very interested in kind of like Freudian psychology and stuff like that, and kind of symbolism and things like this. So he got to work on it. And one, how to say that, part, like while the cigarette companies felt like everyone's already smoking, actually there were a lot of people not smoking, and they were by far mostly women. It was like just a small percentage of women who smoked. Maybe like 5 to 8%. And it wasn't considered good for women to smoke. It was considered like it was associated with I mean, I'm going to use like 1920s language. I would express this differently personally, but it was for women to smoke. It was considered something for prostitutes and something called like fallen women who've like somehow upset God or whatever, something kind of silly. And but also you had like this kind of wave of feminism. I forgot which wave that particular wave is there, but you had this wave of feminism happening. And he was like, I'm going to play into that. We're going to have this cigarette. It's like, he saw it as like a phallic symbol, and a phallic symbol is like something of power. So it's like, it's an empowerment type of thing. And he organized a certain PR stunt, where he got, I think it may have been New York, I'm not sure, like socialites to go to a parade, to go to a certain place. And he got the press to come, and the press knew him. So they knew like there's going to be something interesting happening here. And they all came there. And then at some point they pulled out from somewhere on their body, cigarettes, which Bernays had told the press, go there because that's where the torches of freedom will be lit. So the next day there were like headlines of like torches of freedom. So that's what these cigarettes were called, in the hands of these women. And then fast forward 30 to 40 years, in the mid 1960s, and I actually just looked this up. There was like a peak of women smokers where 33% of women were smoking. I think that's a US statistic. And from like a single digits to 33, because they changed the meaning of like what smoking is. And also, by the way, interestingly, but completely unrelated, I don't have a way to connect this to music later, is Marlboro. Marlboro used to be a women's cigarette. Yes, I had no idea, but because it's such a masculine brand, because of like what happened eventually. But I think it's a really good example of like how you can attach like these values to certain things that people, when they do consume something, they, it's like, oh, I'm the Marlboro man, or what, like, I don't know what that feels like, but, but also don't smoke, stay away from cigarettes, everyone.
Yeah, I agree. Plus one on that. So, it's quite interesting how I would say these narratives can be used as a tool to attach values to consumer goods. With the purpose of like affecting sales, for example, or profitability, or visibility even. And it's quite interesting if we now sort of like connect this sort of like way of doing to the recording music industry, where there's a lot of consumer goods that also inform the way that we experience and consume music. A good example of that would be like, recorded music via vinyl, turntables, and from then on, also, cassette players, and ultimately the Sony Walkman. And well, do you wanna latch onto that and sort of like see how this led to music
Yeah.
becoming static? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So maybe first, just to make the link really clear, was like, for anyone wondering, like, why is this guy suddenly talking about cigarettes and what does it have to do with music? So first you have like the record entering the households, changing each household's and then society's kind of relation with music. So you get like a record player in the house and now you listen to music and then there's like music at home. So how do you sell more music? It's like, well, maybe, well, you get these concert cultures. So you start, in the 60s and young people, they want to kind of be different. And of course, brands play into that really well, including kind of like fashion industries and things like that. I mean, this is decades later, but think of someone like Vivienne Westwood, like punk icon, but also very much, part of this world where it's like, well, how you dress is how you express. And, I like the DIY. And if you're really, really deep in punk, it's about like DIY culture and making your own stuff. But, ultimately, most people are going to express themselves by purchasing things. And, so you get like record players into every household and then slowly into every room. Maybe every room in a house is like slightly different music. People have different tastes and things like that. And music becomes in that sense less communal, maybe even less social in a certain way, because it's like, well, me and my music, I want my MTV as a slogan there. And then, although MTV is actually, talking about these things is kind of like not social, is really abstract from where we're sitting now, because it feels like so social. Like at MTV, we are all watching the same channel, and like kind of consuming the same thing. Cool. Or like, anyway, then we get Walkmans, cassettes, so you can like record the music you like, and you don't need to bother with like, stuff that maybe you don't like, you just record over it. You get, eventually, Napster and stuff like that. People start downloading songs. Then you get iTunes and Steve Jobs, who insists to let people buy single songs so that they don't have to purchase the whole album. So you get the unbundling of the album.
Right.
And Jobs has a real role in that. I'm not just saying it because it was like Apple, but like Jobs was in those negotiations, also like setting price points and things like that. So that became really important culturally. So now people maybe they're listening to the same artist, but they're not having the same album experience anymore. Slowly. And then, you get, in that time, you already get playlists just to kind of manage your collection and stuff like that. But then of course we get like music streaming, and specifically Spotify, who, moved in very strongly with like a playlist paradigm. I think the reason why we're all like listening to playlists is very much because of iTunes and Spotify. And, or at least to some degree. But they set the kind of standards, and they accelerate is maybe the trend there. So now you have, everyone has their own playlists and stuff like that. And then looping back to what we were talking about earlier, you get like recommendation algorithms, because streaming services, in order to get people to actually pay 10 a month, where a lot of people were paying, close to $0 a month for music, when streaming came around because of, piracy. You need to get people to just always have something to listen to, especially people who maybe don't care all that much about music, and they're happy to listen to ads or happy to listen to radio or whatever. How do you get them to pay? So you get like recommendation algorithms, get like really specific. You get things like maybe Last.fm, slightly earlier than Spotify, where, through kind of mechanisms, you can like discover music via other people, which was a really cool way to, break out of your scenes for the first time. So rather than like kind of, then we didn't talk so much about filter bubble. It was rather, I was really into drum and bass music and stuff like that, but I didn't know much about music outside of that. I occasionally listened to something, and then the last FM would be like, well, this person also does that, and they also listen to this stuff. And then it gave you kind of a way out of your bubble rather than into it, because you were just in your scene, or like, and also music was really local. So, it was, growing up around drum and bass, I think Holland had a very different drum and bass scene than the UK, which is really nearby, where drum and bass was way more mainstream, way more known. In Holland at the time, if you mentioned to someone drum and bass, people were like, what? And this is like early 2000s, it's not that long ago, but people just didn't know what drum and bass was. Anyway, so you get like very individualized, static music, and now music has the qualities of, you have these songs that are reacting to, kind of different iterations of this like recorded music era. And how are they reacting? Well, they're reacting by making songs shorter, by moving, the hook forward, or by, cutting the intro, so that if you're in a playlist on a Spotify and people hear your song, that they know what it is. Or that they know early on, like, okay, this is good, rather than they turn on a playlist and they hear your song and they're like, I'm not sure, skip. If your song gets skipped near the top of a popular playlist, you get like pushed down. And if you get pushed down a playlist, you get way less plays, which means you get like way less visibility in the algorithm and stuff like that. So people started hacking that and like changing music for that. Anyway, you have like a very individualized, very social experience around music. And that's the century that we've been through. And I mean, there's other innovations to it, but like ultimately, I think the major thing is like the recording, as a format, static music, or, John Cage, the artist composer, he would refer to recorded music as dead music, because like live music is performed and recorded music is like done. So it's like dead. It's like you can listen to it, but it's like it's not living anymore. I don't like to say it that way. I just like to think about it as like something that is static.
Yeah.
So let me pause there.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, there's layers there for sure. I think one thing that I could add there as well, from our conversation earlier was the invention of the iPhone also contributed to that too, and the Apple app ecosystem, and how the iPhone itself, the device itself, also maybe shaped, how we see these devices. This is mine, iPhone, this is mine, and so all these apps too that are made for it also reflect that sense of like identity. And I also remember a time when I don't know if this was rolled out, and feel free to correct me, Bas, if this is wrong. I remember there was a feature in Spotify. I don't know if this was a prototype. That's where it senses what you're doing, and it sort of like it speeds up the BPM or sort of slows it down depending on what you're doing. If you're working out or you're running, it's like okay, only 120 BPM right now, sort of thing, which I think points to sort of like a certain dynamicism of the musical experience. And then you touched on how artists or current artists, in the past 2 to 3 years, the way that they produce songs also have shifted, right? Let's put the hook right in front. No intros, no long ass intros. Keep the song at 2 minutes tops. That's it. And it has become a little more simple. Like an ABAB format. Hook, verse, and then end. Which really fuels the certain, I guess, way of consuming, especially for the younger generation. And so that points towards like a certain dynamicism, which sort of like which was sort of now going back to how we started this podcast. It's like, yes, it seems like music has gone through this like static area, and it's now, if we could maybe think about the future, maybe the music of the future is less static, considering all the changes that's happening right now?
So, like when reflecting, and this is like, well, actually probably a decade ago, it's definitely a decade ago, that I was reflecting on, music. Basically, first I realized like actually the biggest change hasn't been the internet, not yet, not in 2012. It has been recorded music in like the past 100 years, was what I thought then. So, so it's like, what are the qualities that music got, and like, how did it change the default experience of music? But also, what did it lose? And that's configuration that we have. Is there still a really good reason for that to be the default, the primary configuration? And what I thought back then was like, well, we have these like computers in our pockets that are way more powerful than our computers on our desks just a few years ago, and they could do stuff. They could like, they could let us create. They could make the music adaptive, reactive, dynamic. And in that time you saw, like, I'm going to just give some old examples, but you saw, I want to highlight 3 projects. There was one called RJDJ, which was actually one of the co-founders of that company. The whole team was amazing, but one of the co-founders also founded Last.fm. And they were making music adaptive. How did they do that? So they would try to like map your environment, and then you would go through kind of like soundscapes, and things would change and unlock based on that. And you could like get things. It was a little bit like Pokemon Go, and actually thinking about it now, which was like released years later. So it was like kind of augmented music. Maybe they even like collaborated with people like Hans Zimmer around like what was it, The Dark Knight, I think, and maybe even Inception. Anyway, that company is gone, unfortunately. Something else, another interesting project from that time was by a group called Blue Brain, I believe. And they created a composition that was mapped to Central Park, New York. And they had created like certain shapes where if you're in that shape, that's the composition, but then the shapes overlap. So if you're moving around the space, so imagine a map, and then on the map, they've created shapes, and you're moving around the park. The compositions will start to transition into each other. And there's kind of like Venn diagram places where you get like a bit of everything, not everything, but like a couple of different compositions. So that would maybe be referred to as dynamic music. You have it a lot in video games too, where the composition changes. And I think actually video games are a good example of a place where music is already not that static as a mainstream kind of culture thing. Geez, I forgot the third example. Oh yes, Infinite Jukebox. Infinite Jukebox was something built, you can still find this, something built by a person from a company called The Econest. His name is Paul Lemaire. I hope I'm saying it correctly. The Econest was a music data company that were very active in like Music Hack Day, which was a regular event around all kinds of music business conferences, late 2000s. Kind of when SoundCloud and Spotify and all those companies were still in there. Some like children's shoes, or how do you say that? I don't want to say diapers, but like, anyway.
I get your point. Yeah.
And leave that in. It's okay. So it was actually a really interesting time of like experimentation and stuff like that. So the Econest had this like amazing API with loads of music data, and Paul Lemaire of the Econest, he built this thing which you would upload a track, then some type of algorithm would process the track and see, like basically look at all the different phrases, and would put all the different phrases on a wheel. and then it would like play through the wheel and kind of somewhat randomly, not too randomly, jump from one place to another place in the wheel, and it would make songs infinite. So, so you would just go back to like a verse, or after, you would be in the third chorus and you would go back to the first verse, and then you would go to like the second verse and then the second chorus again. It would just jump around the wheel, and you could like upload any track and it would basically do that. And this is, basically 15 years, maybe a little bit less than 15 years ago. So this has been possible for a long time. Diaconus was required by Spotify. And I imagine some of the features that Spotify has now around, for example, these kind of more intelligent transitions between tracks in certain playlists. So you have especially electronic music playlists where it tries to create like a real transition the way kind of maybe a DJ would do it. Sometimes pretty well, sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes I wouldn't book that DJ, but and maybe also this new DJ feature that they have, maybe it mixes too. I actually don't know, but yeah, that was so already then people were like really trying to figure out like, how do we reconfigure music? DJ Fadim, he released like an interactive album that people could play around with. Björk released her famous Biophilia app, which was it was an album, but it was also a kind of interactive, non-static experience on, I think, tablets. Brian Eno, I mean, we don't need to talk about Brian Eno. Of course, he was doing
Of course.
those are still, you can get them, they're like shapes of music and you can place them in different places. That creates kind of like ambient settings. But actually, when we start talking about like making music less static, I think ambience is like the very obvious place, because you already see it with like installations and stuff like that, where an installation might change based on how much water is flowing through or how many people are in the room and stuff like that. And that's, I really respect the arts, but it's relatively easy to do with ambience than with kind of pop music configurations of songs and stuff like that. So yeah, then I started paying attention to that topic and thinking like that this is going to happen now. And the reason why I remember it was like 10 years ago is like partly because of some embarrassing attempts to talk about it at conferences and just finding like nobody who seems interested in the topic. But also we were talking to record labels at the music streaming service where I was working to see like, hey, would y'all be okay with us making your music non-static, less linear or whatever, and adjusting it to people's day, people's mood, people's tastes or whatever. And yeah, they were not up for it. They were like, no, this is like, this is our products and that's how you have to deliver it. I also think it was really hard to imagine back then. So I've learned since that one really important skill is like when you have like a certain vision, you have to give people the seeds to create that vision themselves in their heads. Otherwise, it's just words and people don't care. If they cannot create the same picture or a version of that picture that you have in your head, they're just not going to understand conceptual, abstract, dreamy stuff. I mean, any artist listening to this must understand this very well.
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, I think communicating our ideas, especially if it's like conceptual, is really an important skill. Since you're talking about like these dynamic music experiences, or at least early prototypes of it, I wonder, because like going to your example of like you proposing, hey, here's an idea, we'll use your catalog to create these dynamic music experiences, right? And they said, no, we're not into that. To me, a question that arises is like, what about artist vision? There is a certain decision-making process. And now this is me speaking as an artist, where there's a purpose. There's a reason why I chose this BPM. I like this sort of feel, and sort of like, and how I crafted it and how this song progresses in itself. What was an intention, was a decision that I made that hopefully people would appreciate. So if music is dynamic, or it's already is dynamic, I'm looking at these new Spotify feature rollouts. What does that do to the artist's vision and artist sort of like autonomy, in terms of like putting forth a point of view,
I love that. Actually, that was a question that I got a lot, where like speaking more directly to artists, because labels, they were just like, this is our products. And they were talking about music as product, which for me was very difficult as a music lover to hear the music that they were delivering to us, to hear it referred to as product. But anyway, it's just like industry lingo, I guess. But anyway, so speaking to artists, I would get or if I would get objections, they were often in that area. It's like, no, it's like my music, this is what I want it to be, and I don't want it to be anything else. And I guess. I mean, you can, but the thing is, culture lives, and so culture lives. So, some classical composers, they would write down in highly detailed way exactly how something should be performed. Some not so much. Neither of them would expect some people in like the Bronx in the 80s to start putting it on like hip hop beats and like putting rhythmic rhymes on that and stuff like that. But there we go. And so like one, I think culture always lives, and so how to say this? So, okay, I'll first say what I don't believe is, I don't believe that it doesn't matter what the artist, believes that their music should be. That's really, really important. But if it's good, if it resonates with people, it's going to be more, because people are going to sing along to it. Maybe people are going to play around with it. People are going to think like, oh, this song really matches with that. And they're going to try to mix it or create a mashup. And kind of the moment you release it, release is a beautiful word for it, because you have to let it go. And I say that as someone who does not make a living from music. So, from making music. So, I want to be really humble in that. And I understand, like, if I say things about this, it might feel like, well, it's easy for him to talk, to someone who is making music for a living. But yeah, releasing is vulnerable, and I put something out there. And I think what the recorded music era has done is it has said, this is the music. Here's the physical thing, the physical copy of this bit of culture. This is it. This is the real thing. This is how it's supposed to be. And you as a listener, as a kind of participant, or like you as a listener, have no say in what this song is or how it behaves or what it does or whatever. You have no role in this music. This is what the music is on this record. That's between the corporation and the artist. And if you want it, you can buy it. If you don't want it, well, too bad. And kind of, I'm speaking very hyperbolic here, because there are cover versions of derivatives and stuff like that. But that is a certain relation that has maybe been established in the past century, and a very strong relation between like kind of the social contracts between artist and listener, where you kind of say like, this is my work, this is completely mine, and you are not a part of it. You can like consume it, or you can participate in it by like dancing or maybe singing along or something like that, but you're not a part of it. And that configuration might change, but I think there's also something else, which is it's easier to make whole songs, to produce songs now than it was. Like I remember early 2000s being on hip hop forums, and I wanted to rap and stuff like that, but it was really hard to like record anything good with Cool Edit Pro 2, I think was the program
that's
I had.
OG.
I had like a really tiny, very shitty microphone and like a Creative Sound Blaster audio, what do you call those? The audio card or
Sound
whatever.
cards.
Yeah. And, but it was so hard to get like decent quality recordings. Even like your mobile phone does a much better job than like really decent home setups in that time. So instead it was like something called text seeing on these forums where there were all text-based battles and there were all like subcultures around that where we have like a forum and people would really know each other, and then they'd be like, okay, who wants to battle? And then you battle, you have like 20 minutes to write your thing, and then people vote on it and stuff like that. It was really pretty cool. And then there were you also had to consider, oh man, I really hope I will remember why I went to this tangent, but you would have kind of text-based flow. So like the way that you would flow when you're saying things out loud, that's a little bit differently when you write a text. So you want to make the text look nice. You would have kind of like, it was really an art form that disappeared as soon as it became easier to start recording things and stuff like that. And then when you start recording things and recording became easier, producing with some quality became easier, recording your own guitar became easier. It didn't necessarily need to go to a studio and stuff like that to do that and have like a whole mixing board. Eventually digital audio workstations became cheaper, but de facto they became really cheap because people were pirating them a lot. And so people suddenly had access to all these tools. And then you go from a place where maybe there's, I don't know, a few hundred releases a day to 60,000 tracks a day being added to Spotify. And I think by now it's about like 100,000 a day, which means more people are making more music than ever. And so cool. More people are starting to participate actively in our collective culture. Maybe we're going to start seeing more music made by people who are not artists. Just like how if you see TikToks or Instagram stories where, people put a song together with a video, that was hard work in Windows Movie Maker 15 years ago or something like that. But now you do it like that. And
it's easy, and you could do it within app as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite fascinating too. Now that you sort of like outline that, and I think to me a thought that really comes to mind, and as we progress in this conversation, is that music is truly dynamic. Or it has always been dynamic. Maybe this dynamicism is explored in different contexts. As you were sharing about, what does this do about the artist's vision? And I agree with you. I think that the participatory culture of music has always been there, maybe in different forms. One example that comes to mind much more recently is this interview that I was reading of this DJ, Gia Fu, who specializes in salsa music from like the 70s, and in her interview, she says that, people give me a bad rap because I don't mix my tracks. But then when the way that people see her music is through YouTube and through like Instagram, but really the way that her music is being consumed in a participatory way is usually at ballrooms, usually at dance sort of like floors. And obviously participation there is also movement. But then at the same time too, she asserts that if you actually play one salsa record on top of the other, dancers are gonna hate you for doing that. That is a big no-no. You play the song, you end it, and then you start a new one. That's how you do it. And I think to me, what that speaks to is like this attention to like how people actually dynamically participate in this sort of music. Now, going back to like where we're at in a much more technological sense, in a cultural sense of participation in music and dynamicism, you said that we see already this happening with Instagram Reels, TikToks, easily remixable, speeding up tracks, slowing it down, much more easier. And even prior to that, having the whole sort of like revolution of democratization of tools, for music making. There's going to be a lot of good music that would come from that. There would also be a lot of mediocre music that would come with that, which you already touched on. Like maybe folks who are maybe not musically inclined, creating music, which is fine. I think music is a gift that we should all have access to. But again, maybe to double down on your point that music is dynamic or could be dynamic, I would say that just from hearing you lay out your ideas, that music has always been dynamic.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts or challenge that notion?
I think we've gone through an era where music was less dynamic as a default experience. So, and this started adding this word, and if you would go back in the podcast, you will hear been talking about like default experience or primary ways to experience, because recorded music is something really, really static, and like it doesn't mean like people weren't singing and stuff like that anymore. But the acts of the song, like singing, or playing an instrument at home, got a very different type of societal role than it had. But I like that you said that like music has always been dynamic, because that was my departure point where it was like, no, but like music really changed. So how was music different before? It's like, well, those things still exist. They're not true anymore. They're just not as prevalent as a default kind of experience. Why? And can that change, and how, and what did we lose? What did we gain? That the song is sound the same every time you hear it. Amazing. Like super cool technology. Recording is really cool. But then also, what did we lose? Is that, and I think I asked this question earlier, but like, is this configuration still, does it still make sense as the default configuration of like music, relation of like listener and creator and things like that? And, I didn't feel like it, but I thought it was going to be music streaming services driving a change there. And kind of actually, it's been maybe more things like TikTok and kind of, you can see them as social networks, but they're creative tools with like strong social context. So the people that are using those apps, they have a motivation to create that's very different from like an artist. Well, can be very different from an artist's motivation to create, which is they don't want to create art. They want to create memes. They want to joke with their friends. They want to be visible. They want to be seen. They want to feel significant, all those things. And they're creating. And then to loop it back to punk, go back 100 years. You wanted us to be a musician, you had to be trained, you had to be really good to be able to go join these bands and stuff like that. There were like auditions and stuff like that, and all of that of course still exists. But then you get like punk, and the point there was like, no, like anyone, in the beginning especially, like anyone could like pick up a guitar and just start playing, and they could be a band.
All you need is 3 chords.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So So I think if you go back, and why I'm saying that is because I think there's a certain kind of conversation around AI now, which is like, music will never be relevant, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but like, it's got to be different music. It's not going to be the same as like the recording era type of music. It's not going to have the same configuration of like artists and fan culture and stuff like that. That is 20th century mass media culture. We're now in networked media culture. And this is why I was saying the internet hasn't been the biggest change yet, but it's about to be the biggest change to music since recorded music, and arguably larger than recorded music because it's going to just swallow it. Everyone can be expressing their musical ideas, like we do with memes and things like that. And, I think music already started behaving a little bit like memes. But we can get into that in a second. Another thing that I think is important that AI will enable is like, or will make easier to participate in is kind of like multiplayer music, kind of jamming on each other's ideas and creating like a network age equivalent of sitting in your living room before dinner with your sibling and like just singing a local folk song that you've heard, or something like that. And yeah, let me pause there because those are like two threads. I don't know if I can get too deep into multiplayer music, but I want to recommend to everyone that they check out something called Endless with triple S.
Is it endless.fm?
I think so, yeah. Endless with triple S.fm.
Triple S, okay.
By a musician, founded by a musician called Tim Exile.
Yes. Yeah, that one.
He has releases on like Ninja Tune label. And he created like a social digital audio workstation, social music production thing, but it has like, I don't think it has like a finished song state. It's just like jams, and you just jam on each other's jams and you just iterate a little bit like kind of GitHub in a way where you just like add something, you push it to production, and then you get to, and then there's a new version. And if you want to roll back, you can roll back and iterate from there again. And if you want to move it forward from where it is, or if you want to start a whole new song from like the very early part of the jam, you can do that. So those things are really cool. But, I still think, it requires, I think it's still pretty demanding of the user. You have to kind of, I can kind of jam with it because I've back in the Sound Blaster, audio sound card days, I had like FL Studio on my computer and I used it a lot. And then, I don't really produce anymore, but like, then I was kind of dabbling with it. So I kind of know by way a little bit about these types of programs. I know what some of the concepts are and stuff like that. But, otherwise, it's a little bit hard, but I think all of that is going to be so extremely easy. Just, you know, how ChatGPT has made things easy and stuff like that. But that's what I have to say about multiplayer music. But then like music and memes is a whole theme on its own. But like, how do you, if I say like music as memes, what comes to mind for you? Or meme-like music, or music behaving like memes? What comes to mind for you?
You asked me about memes and what comes to mind. But before that, music as memes. I just wanted to touch on how, when you shared Endless FM, kind of like a sort of a GitHub or an open source way of creating music with each other, building on top of each other. Which I think is sort of like, I guess the statement that comes to mind for me is like, is this the new kind of creativity? But then the challenge to that is like, creativity has always been building on top of each other's work, right? Like as an artist myself, I could point to certain points of influence, or I could point to collaborations that actually made my work better. So I feel like it's always been there, but maybe this time around we're translating that into a more technological form, one that is in context with our current networked state, And now pointing that and attaching that to memes actually become funnier when here's a meme, right? And then people build on top of it, change the captions and all this stuff. It becomes funnier and funnier over time. It is ephemeral. It has a point, and then people move on or build on top of it. But at some point, there's a life cycle to it, and, obviously there are classic memes that people still keep on using over and over, but music as meme, I feel like there's a certain mapping there that looks interesting to me where music can be built in collaboration with each other, such that over time, the more collaborations, the more inputs that it has, the more impactful it becomes. That to me is like music as memes. Now, if you want to talk about like a meme, I mean, like tangibly music as meme, I think about this one song that I really like that blew up on TikTok, I guess like months ago. It was a dance track that started slow, like a slow like sample. I'm forgetting the name who made it. Like a slow like soul sample, and then it became like a house track, and that people started like using that over and over. I think to me that is memeable music. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Which parts? No,
Um,
I like what you said. I wanted to zero in on something that you said about like kind of memes becoming better over time. Because maybe the important part is like not every single iteration of that meme. There's going to be a lot of bad versions of that meme. Like just dumb caption, like just bad captions or, really specific captions to something like maybe only relevant to like one high school or something like that. And, but it becomes a bit like language, maybe where like the one image already, it conveys a lot like in one go. And then it's like, okay, but so, that's concepts now connected to this. And I think music has a lot of those qualities to it, especially, music as language is a very common thing people talk about. I would almost say I think it's a little bit like a cliche, but why not? I guess it is. But somewhere else where I first started thinking about like music as memes was actually thinking about SoundClouds, and specifically, there was a genre. I mean, I guess it still exists, but there was a genre called Moombahton, which started, I think, around 2009 or 10.
Right.
And the story there was a DJ from Washington, D.C., called Dave Nada. And I might be getting this wrong. So there might actually be listeners in the audience that know better because they were really close to that scene and stuff like that, especially if you get this out in front of the FWB folks. But it was like a school skipping party, which I didn't know what that is, but basically people, instead of going to school, they go to someone's house and they have a party. And Dave Nada showed up with like kind of EDM records, cause like, okay, there's going to be a party, and the DJ before him was playing like reggaeton and stuff like that. So it's like, how am I going to do that? Now around that time, in EDM, there were a lot of DJs from the Netherlands who were, like very active and just good. And I don't know why, but like, anyway, the Netherlands, because of colonial history, has had a lot of Caribbean influence in its electronic music scenes. A lot of these producers, they had like Caribbean backgrounds. So they had this kind of like dembow type rhythm in their house tracks. It was still kind of 4x4, but there would also be like, there would maybe like some things might be like a little bit offbeat or something like that. And like, so Nada was like, well, okay, if I'm going to start playing, maybe I just like slow it down. I just put it to hundreds 110 BPM instead of 128, which was like the default BPM of house then, maybe still now, I don't know. And
Yeah.
we're going to play it at 110 and be in that kind of reggaeton range and see what happens. And people went like, wow, and they really loved it. And
It's amazing.
and he did that with a track called Moomba. I forgot the original artist, but there's an Afrojack remix, and that's the one he slowed down. And then he did it with another track too called Riverside, actually. So those, and then he went home and he thought, I'm going to need to call this something. And he made this slowed edit of the track Moomba, and he was like, well, reggaeton Moombaton, put it on SoundCloud. And then producers from around the world that were like following him were like, oh, this is sick. And they started jamming on it. And then you get like, kind of the Skrillex inspired dubstep folks making like Moomba core, and you get like Moomba soul, and people start to kind of find all kinds of variations on it. And then a dude from Rotterdam called Munchi, he starts putting like kind of gabber stuff into it. And it's just like, wow, what happens? But like this dude just kind of not accidentally, but like slowing a track down and being like, oh, this works. Cool. Let's put it on SoundCloud. And people are like, oh, this is sick. I'm going to make my own version of this. This is a good meme. And so I think really around SoundCloud has had a really important role because suddenly there was like a central globally accessible platform. And again, it's like early social media. There was no Instagram. People were not connected to each other through like Facebook as they were later. I was going to say as they are now, but they're not anymore now either. There was a lot of forums and stuff, like forums and blogs and stuff like that. That's how you found out about stuff. And SoundCloud kind of provided this central platform where ideas could spread really fast, like a Tumblr, like a Twitter, like a TikTok is on like hyper speed version of that. But anyway, so that's where I first thought about like, oh, here's like you get these micro genres, and it's really like a meme, and then you can see it with like how that actually probably impacts this like rap culture and stuff like that too. I think trap also, like at least the kind of modern version of trap. I think that had a lot to do with SoundCloud and then probably Instagram.
That's beautiful. I think that's such a beautiful reflection of how music could be seen as a sort of meme, where a meme is an idea that travels fast. I didn't know that the origins of Moombaton. I am a fan of Munchi though, but that's really amazing. That it was sort of like an artist, Dave Nada, sort of like, okay, in this context, what do I do? And he did this thing, slow down the track, presented it, it caught on, it now became like a meme where people added their captions of it or their own interpretations of it. It's a form of derivative work, but then that derivative also sort of like, it was also expounded upon and maybe became its own certain sound as well, which I think is sort of like maybe points to where we're at in the future, where there's new modes of expression, there's new tools. You mentioned AI, and we see early inklings of that already in Holy Plus with the tone transfer sort of like feature. Where a musician could actually transfer, say an instrument or their own voice into, say, Holly's voice. What would that look like? That's also participatory in a way. That also makes music dynamic. In addition to the TikTok sort of like remixes that we're seeing right now. And so I do think that AI maybe points towards like, I carefully say new, because sometimes some of our expressions are not entirely new, but maybe the form is new. Maybe the medium is new. I'm not too sure. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I was going to say no, like straight away. I didn't want to go to be like, no, but it is like, can actually, I guess don't cut it, but you could cut it and be immediately on that question. No, because I think that there's going to be, many different, I'm going to get to say the words, a plethora of iterations, variations on these concepts. And I think we've gone through something really unique in the past century of music having one format for all music, basically, which was the recording. And that's, I'm trying to think of, I guess to some degree, video games have had that too, until they became, so what I mean with that is they would be arcades or cassettes. So they're either in the machine or in the cassette. And that gave certain constraints. You can have certain controllers and that's how you interact with that media. But then you start getting text-based or browser-based games. You start getting mobile games and, you start getting things called non-games, which are maybe more kind of environments and stuff like that. And, you start getting things like Minecraft and The Sims and, very non-linear type of environments, things where you build worlds together and stuff like that. So the kind of, if you think back to video games in the 90s, or maybe let's say early 90s, format has changed radically because of, and in many different ways, it's kind of splintered across different ways because of, kind of networks, or partly because of network media. And I think music as a format has not, the music itself has not changed yet as a response to networks media. Aspects have changed, for example, the Moombaton example, where there's a platform, there's a lot of people in their bedrooms, all of them have a production studio in their laptop or in their computer or now in their phone. So they can hear an idea and be I want to jam on this. And it's really easy. Cool. That's I'm 37. When I was really young, you wanted to make music. You need to figure out how to get yourself into the studio and stuff like that. So you really needed experts around you to do stuff. So just what has happened in the course of just a generation is wild. And the AI thing is going to be bigger than that. So it's really hard to say. I think, I think there are certain, so here is where it's really hard to make specific predictions, but I do think there are certain, things that we will see. For example, I think we will see more small music, meaning music that is only relevant to very small groups of people. Songs that only exist to people, things like that. In what form will the group chat have its own generative radio station? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know if that's going to be the thing. And also the thing is it's not going to be a single format. There's going to be many formats. So I think that's one aspect. So I said no, because I don't see a specific way. I see many potential ways. That's really hard to say.
Yeah. And with that, I agree. Yeah, I do agree. That I guess what I'm trying to communicate was more of well, let me start with the agreement that there would be multiple forms. Some of it I wouldn't even know. Some of it would be too far in the future. And I also acknowledge that, I come from a certain background that sort of oh, this is what I know. I guess all in all, I don't, I have no challenges against it. But I do see that if I'm understanding correctly, is that this new network state that we're in, aided by all these new forms of technology, AI, for example, game-like experiences.
I just want to say, I refer to it as network reality, just to not confuse it with the book of an author whose last name starts with the letter B, and I don't want to talk about him. But like,
Yes.
so
We're not talking about that. Yeah.
Network reality or networked reality, maybe.
Yes. That's a better word. Yeah. Network reality. Aided by these new tools, in what forms? We don't know, but when I say creative expressions, I'm talking about derivatives, participation, some sort of movement. May not be physical movement, but could be a form of a digital movement of sorts. I also agree or maybe see a future that small music, like you said, a music for a specific group of community or group of people, which I also think is not new. I think scenes operated in that way, where it only sort of like satisfied or fulfilled a small group of people, which at some point also expanded. And so, I would say all in all, I see this vision too. And I wonder too, I think the question for me as both of us, as we participate in this sort of like ecosystem, thinking about new tools and new ways of doing and new expressions, we're both part of like this Web3 subculture. And we're part of like these different communities. How do you see Web3 itself specifically aid in these new forms of expressions? Do you see inklings of that already?
Cool. I love that you went there because that's where I really wanted to go now. Yeah, like, I mean, again, I think like visual, or what did I say again? Well, I forgot. I think I had an example earlier where like, oh yeah, when I was talking about video games, I think again, visual arts is kind of to some degree like leading the way, maybe because it's like an easier format to experiment with. But what I think is super cool is that because of NFTs and the communities around them and kind of the whole subculture that has started to exist in this, like, let's say early Web3 days, is generative media and especially generative visual arts have gotten some type of outlet or format that is networks, that is really internet native. And you can think about that through NFT, these PFP NFTs where you get like, I mean, I don't know if they're really that generative, but they're like, there's all these layers that it rolls the dice on your layers and then you get like a particular version for your NFT. But then there's also like kind of composable things where you get to kind of make choices with what it looks like, or your, I think, Friends with Benefits, the DAO, the community, they're releasing like their membership NFT, or maybe it's already live, of, which will also have like, if you've been part of certain experiences, that's going to be visible on that like pass basically. If you have a Zorb, which is Zora's kind of NFT thing that they drops at some point, then that's going to be on your pass and stuff like that. Yeah, I think we have like a medium which rewards creating unique versions of stuff where there's only one of it, and it's actually scarce. So you can make it abundant, everyone can experience it, but it can only be owned by one person. And that gives way to making generative and adaptive, etc., different music more viable also as commercial formats and as a way for artists to connect with fans, maybe in the more like in a just traditional relation that we're already familiar with from just our culture. Yeah, I'm trying to think of good examples. I think like the whole async platform is really interesting. So for people not familiar, async, both in music as well as in visual arts. They let you upload like various layers and set various kind of um, uh, aspects to your NFT. So when people collect something, it generates a unique one that's only theirs. All that stuff is like super cool. I think, I don't know, the thing is, this has been figured out. So it's like, I don't know if I'm saying much or if I'm just repeating myself now, because it's kind of been figured out. But I think the important thing there though is tying back to how innovation works in music and arts. Technology happens, or it doesn't just happen, but it happens despite the music industry and creative industries. Like when first, like I was like in discussions around like how can the music industry use blockchain and stuff like that, and it was very much focused on like, oh, now we have this like other type of bookkeeping, other type of like keeping data and doing like transacting changes in data and stuff like that. Nobody was thinking about a blockchain as a creative vehicle, like really not. It was very much about administration. And then some crazy artists, like a Jonathan Mann or someone, goes by the name of Matthew. They come along and they're like, let's do some creative stuff with this. It's cool. And, we're going to, and it has, I think, for everyone led to maybe or for everyone, or for people kind of involved in the space, it's given them another way to think about like, how am I creating music? What is the relationship with people? When is the song finished? Who do I create with? How do we share the value? What is the role of the community around my music for like in both in the creation as well as in like the value and the afterlife, or the life of a song rather. Cause, maybe also with NFTs, there's maybe a sense of like, well, when a song is released, it's not done. That's like the start. I think maybe the Sound XYZ account tweeted that today. So the drop is the start, but like, so people start thinking like, what role do we give people in like keeping a song alive? So unlike John Cage's things, like now there's the recorded version, which is dead. NFTs and kind of Web3 and these communities and stuff like that, they give, a dimensions of music that can keep it alive after the release, that can keep morphing it perhaps and give more people a role in it in a way that's also benefits the creator, which was very hard to do kind of pre Web3 and especially pre YouTube content ID and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree with that. I think that's what Web3, at least to me, also sort of gives a canvas, like, the song doesn't end with a release. It actually starts there. I would +1 that, and part of this, if you see it as a sort of like, a life cycle, the life cycle actually starts at the release. The distribution mechanics of it is also part of the release, the experience of making it is part of that release. The act of participating and supporting it is an act, connected to it too.
I have a question for you, but maybe tell me if you were going to make like a point that you really want to make. But I'll tell you the question first. The release of a song, let's say traditional way, pre-Web3, would you see that more as a birth, like the start of a life, or a death and then the start of a legend?
Yeah. That's an interesting question to think about. I mean, I can only point towards like my experiences as an independent artist, right? I feel like, to me personally, from an artist perspective, the song starts in my head, and so therefore it already has started. You can argue that it already has started, but maybe the act of releasing it, like you said, could be seen as a sort of like, what was that? Was it John Cage who said like the song is dead? Like at this point,
Yeah.
oh no, you were also saying about how the word release is actually a good word, because like now it's not yours. Now it's,
You have to let it
you know,
go.
all these people's. Yeah, you gotta let it go. Yeah. So that in itself could be like seen as the new life of it.
The
I don't know if I
aftermath.
answered your question, but I'm curious to hear how you see it.
Oh man, I don't want to think about it. It's like, I mean, I'm going to think about it, but I can't do that in like a podcast. Like it's evening here. So I know I'm going to meet some big friends later. And I think this is actually a topic I really want to talk about. But I don't have an opinion on it yet. I think I'm leaning more towards probably like the death, because, the song is done. So it depends a little bit as like, what do you consider like the living creature in that? And what it's, and how would you define like life and death around the song? But, when it's released, it is done. It's not going to change anymore. It's lived. It's gone through its transformation, and now it's there, and that's it. And what we get is the story that is contained in that song. We as an audience. So we never experienced, I don't know, MLK or something like that. Like, or just legendary people, or like we never experienced like Caesar. But we get the legends of his life, which is the story that was written in his life, but that thing is done. And now it's for like the audience to like kind of enjoy, removed from the actual life. And I think in a way, a song has some similarities to that, where like the song dies when it's released, at least in traditional formats. And then it becomes a legend for everyone else, and everyone's going to give it their own meaning that's going to be really different from maybe what the song itself would have wanted, or what the artist that was working on the song would have necessarily wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a good point of view too. Yeah, I think my big takeaway there is that.
I did
yeah,
make. Sorry, I did make like a tiny double sound. I was just saying, just the cool thing about this question is like you can argue for both sides very clearly. So it's like, it's a good conversation starter, I think, at NFC NYC, the Songcamp party. But this might be in the past by the time this comes out, I guess.
I love it. I think that's a good question to really marinate on. And you know, I do appreciate all these questions and these ideas and new concepts that you're bringing forth to the table. And that's something that I've always appreciated about you and your work, you know, and your writing. Bas, this has been like an amazing conversation, just packed full of like insights for me personally and ideas to really marinate on. Let's shift gears and let's do a lightning round. Are you cool with that?
Oh, I love lightning.
Okay.
Wow.
I've had some feedback that sometimes these lightning round questions are not truly lightning round, and so, you know, when I say lightning, don't feel pressured to be time bound with your answers. So first question, share a tweet that stood out to you recently.
Yeah.
Or a meme.
No, it's going to be tweets. There's an account called 0x Designer on Twitter. And he posted a thread of a design competition, or maybe not a competition, but like some programmers got together and they were like, let's make the most ridiculous volume slider. So you have like a volume slider where you're like kind of loading, and then it shoots the little ball for determining how loud it is. It shoots it onto the line. And it's like, now it's like 80. And if you press it longer, it shoots it to 100. There's really annoying kind of like drop down menus. There's like random buttons. There's all kinds of like really creative ideas in this thread. There's like 35 different like volume controls. And it's really funny. It's like full of ideas, and all of them are really bad ideas. But that was the intention. Like it was like kind of a joke game. Like let's make some horrible UI, and that's what they did.
I love that. I love that so much. Would you mind sharing me that tweet so that I could share? I could put it on the show notes.
Of course.
Two or three current favorite publications, Substacks, newsletters that cover like music culture or music innovation.
Well, What Our Music is always going to be in there.
Yes, I agree.
It's just really like a must read for people thinking about the intersection of music and technology. I think the Zora zine is really interesting. I think actually a lot of like kind of Web3 related publications are really good because of the conversations and the points of view they want to curate. So I would really recommend Zora zine also. Thirdly, well, I mean, there's a news. I don't know if it's. I think this is one that nobody really talks about. So I'm gonna just mention it. I don't know if it's like the most relevant to the audience, but there's a newsletter called Exponential View by a guy called Azim Azar. And it's it's about like exponential technology. It's a weekly digest, basically. He has a premium version where it has like more stuff, but it's like a really good way to stay up to date on, like the technology, maybe without the culture. So it's not necessarily about the intersection of culture and technology. It's just really about like, here's what's happening in biotech. Here's what's happening in like kind of space stuff. Here's what's happening in like, battery technology. So that can, be great for rockets, that can be great for cars and, collecting solar power and stuff like that. It talks a lot about kind of climate tech and things like this. So I really like that newsletter. But then, it doesn't necessarily have a direct relation with music, but remember the metal casting thing. If like, you gotta read those things, you gotta stay up to date because like, who knows where the next idea might come from of what to do.
1,000%. And that is creativity, really. It's pulling from different, seemingly disparate ideas, and putting it to use. And yeah, please send me those links too. I would love to share that to the audience. 3 developments in music culture or innovation or technology that make you cringe.
Oh man. So I'm just quickly taking a note of what I said that I need to send you.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
3 developments in music/culture that make me cringe. Yeah. Oh man, it's even painful
this
to
question.
even think about it. No, it's like there's this like this thing that has. Okay, there's this thing that's been dubbed like perpetually online, and I've been there, especially the kind of lockdown periods of the pandemic where you're just like online too much and you start to like read about things and you're just like getting all this information and that becomes your world. And now you have an opinion about it. You need to share that opinion and you need to like post your takes and you need to let people know what you think, strangers, argue with them. And like that's aspects of, our like culture. Oh man, it's like, it's so wasteful. It's pure reaction. It's just reactivity to vibes. There's no creative acts with it. It's just like, just constant response, constant like kind of dopamine triggers and stuff like that. It's really, it's quite toxic because I think also it like makes people really, feel like things are quite hostile and you can see this everywhere, even in people who have really good intentions, who I 100% would agree with on probably all kind of like, let's say social issues and things like that. But then they want to come in and they want to like lecture, or they want to tell people how to think, how to behave, etc. And it's like, yo, but I don't know you. Why are you in my conversation? And,
Right.
and like, I do behave like that, but get out. It's not like your place or something like that. And, that aspect is, I think I was listening to a history podcast, called the Rest of History. And it was talking about the Cathars, and Cathars, they were a, what do you call that? Like a heretic Christian sect. And they felt that the Catholic Church was corrupted. So we're really virtuous. And I always, as someone with a bit of a rebellious streak, I've always thought, oh, heretics, they're cool. They're the good ones. They're like fighting the power. But it's like, no, these people, they were really virtuous, and they were way more conservative than like the Catholic Church, and way more kind of morally like ties and things like that. So one thing that I'm kind of seeing maybe in my scenes, including like things like punk and stuff like that, is that people police each other a little bit, and in a way that is like, that's not what we do here, but like, I know it's necessary, but like, why are we doing that with each other rather than, and it's really hard. It's a really hard balance. It's actually really hard to talk about. But there's like certain toxic aspects to it where they're not creating space, which is what we should do for people who really need that, and not creating safety for people that really need that. I think it comes more from like a place of like ego and needing to do that and get like a response or something like that. And it's not always the case. And you know, I don't want to make this too black and white, because people do that. And, that's really just it's not absolutely not a black and white thing, but this is something that feels quite cringy. I feel in some ways, a lot of the safe spaces that I'm in, they're less free than they used to be. Which is weird. Yeah, it's like, I don't mean free like in morally dubious things. It's like, I think they're very policed in some ways, and again, it depends. There's plenty of exceptions, and but yeah, it's a hard to express idea. But let's say this tackles all three cringy things, because just for time's sake.
Yeah, totally.
But if people know what I mean,
and
they have a good way of expressing, like if people know what I mean and they have read good things about this, or they have good ways of expressing this kind of like really complicated things to talk about, let me know. But if you're going to say social justice warrior and stuff like that, then don't let me know. Stay away.
Copy that. Yeah, totally. Yeah. 2 to 3 artists that you're currently into right now.
Yeah. Okay. So, one, I mean, I've been into all of these for a while, but, one is Horror, HO9909.
Yes,
I think they started making like trap music and stuff like that, but then they got really into kind of hardcore punk, and then they just completely shifted styles towards that. And, I've seen them live a couple of times, and, they don't, at least the times I've seen them, they didn't have a band on stage, but they were so powerful. It was like so intense. It was really great. And the reason why I just thought of them is they have a song called Punk Police, and there they complain about like punks telling them what punk should be or something. I think that's at least that's my takeaway from the song. I might be wrong, but it's like, so here comes the punk police say what punk should be, which is like so not punks to do, but whatever. And then,
Horror is, I believe, also LA native.
I think they're from New Jersey originally, but they,
I see.
Now.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Cool. I'd love to, I'd go instantly. Like if they're around somewhere where I am, I'm seeing them. If they're performing. Then um, Ice Peak, which is a Russian ice. So it's ice, like icy free, PEAK. That's how you'll find it. I think they came from like the witch house scene, which was kind of a bit of an internet genre. Kind of, I don't know, gothy electro vibes. I don't even know. Do you know how to describe that music?
No, I get you. Yeah, it was really in the late aughts, 2010s that genre emerged, mostly on Tumblr. But yeah,
people had like a lot of triangles and stuff in their names, and
yeah, exactly.
that aesthetic. And anyway, that whole style was really big, kind of everywhere east of Germany. So in Poland and like Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and stuff like that. And like, and then when kind of trap made its when EDM people started messing with trap, and when that style kind of made its way across the ocean towards Russia, they started like mixing those sounds, and they have this like beautiful, ominous, gloomy, harsh, but also sometimes very beautiful songs and melodies and rhythms, and it's really good. The last album they did is really more of a punk album. So I would not start there. I mean, it's interesting, but for me, where it gets really interesting is like the 2 albums before their most recent album. Not to say that their most recent album isn't good, but that's not why I'm in love with them. And then last one, maybe an artist called Bob Vylan, Vylan, like Bob Dylan, but with a V. British kind of rapper who's also playing with like rock and punk and stuff like that. So worth checking out.
Hell yeah. Horror, Ice Peak, and Bob Vylan. Okay, last question, and feel free to take your time with this one. I've been told that this is a big question. Maybe just some back context. I think, all through the season, I've been exploring what 21st century creativity looks like, which I think also touches on what we talked about today. So to you, in your own words, from your own point of view, what does 21st century creativity look like?
Oh boy. Well, we did talk about it a little bit, so I could paraphrase some things. So I'm figuring out how to communicate this aspect, but so I was going to say social, but for people who, are creatives, for them, creativity is social, has a social aspect to it often.
Yes.
Because you get your contacts and you learn from other artists and stuff like that, even if you're just behind your computer all day producing stuff. But social creativity on a more massive scale, more people iterating on our shared culture. Participative is a word I would use. I think creativity has not necessarily been very participative because it's been hard to participate. Now it's easier. Take memes as an example, which is also a form of creativity. So participative, multiplayer, fast, very, very fast paced, because it's just going to be like easier and easier to get whole ideas like out there if you want. And then there must be a contrast to that too. And this is where maybe I will agree with like kind of critics about, creative AI and stuff like that. And the creative AI critics will say, there will always be like a role for artists, and artists aren't going to be replaced because people care so much about the human behind the arts and stuff like that. I think that's true. But like, if I'm like jamming with AI with a friend and we're making creative stuff, like actually I have a game that I play with friends, which is like, you imagine a famous painting or a famous place or famous building, and then you describe it in AI without saying the name of it. And then you show the image that you get out of your description, and they have to guess what it is. Here we're being creative. We're drawing stuff. Essentially, this used to be Pictionary. And I have one friend who really likes to put sausages in pictures for some reason. She'll be like, the last meal with like loads of sausages. They just really have to know. Anyway, we just get this like loads and loads and loads of creativity. So that's going to happen for sure. And maybe it's going to replace something, because I'm going to be playing those games with my friends instead of going to the movies or whatever, or maybe instead of buying a video game. So that creative act is going to replace some other artist's work, maybe. But anyway, the counter trend is, of course, people are still going to care about artistry, about people who really go in and like touch all the buttons of the audio workstation, know how like FM synthesis works, and really dive deep in that. And they don't just generate like kind of sound ideas or music ideas or like meme iterations like that. They'll really go in. That will exist, and maybe that type of role might be, I think temporarily will be like less respected because it will be really easy to do it. But then maybe also more respected because people will realize how hard it is to actually do that stuff yourself. Just like how people respect the modular synth community when they see like, you have to actually like interrupt your loops and stuff like it's a lot of work to work on modular synths.
Right.
Stuff like this, or people who play an instrument like really, really well. You don't have to make music at this point. But you see someone play like violin extremely well, and there's a kind of respect and awe that will be part of people. So that's not going anywhere. But there's going to be like those two things. But I think we're going to branch away from the default locks up music. This is it. This is the song, and that's how it is. And you will never hear another, or all the other versions are not real. I think we're moving very quickly towards a way more specific format of music experiences, and it's changing everything. It's going to change the relation between like the definition of an artist, because an artist now is very different than an artist 100 years ago. And it is in 20 years from now, we're going to remember the definition of artist as we have it now, but what the role will be of an artist is actually really hard to say, because you don't require an artist for really good creativity, necessarily.
Yeah. Well said. The role of the artist and creativity will change, will evolve. I think is like my big takeaway there. Bas, it's been amazing talking to you. And also, as a friend too. Whenever I have something on my mind, I know that I could always reach out to you and talk about all these ideas. It has been an insightful conversation. Just a lot of insights, a lot of like questions, to think about how we develop this whole sort of like thing, this whole space that we're in, how all of these things that we care about, how they will evolve in the future. Do you have any parting thoughts?
Well, just
the end. Yeah.
I'm very flattered or honored to like be asked, because it's one to just like think about these ideas and stuff like that, and talk about them. And it's something completely different that I know as well from just my career to work on it and do these things. And Songcamp has been like really special, like what you and everyone else have been like working on and doing, especially with chaos. It's been just like so. It's creating new paradigms and showing how to do it, like actually doing it. And that's really hard. So I'm like, wow, like imposter syndrome really to be on this. Also like, with the other guests and stuff like that, were also all really amazing. There's that. And then maybe a final parting thought. It's about ideas. I don't know if it's a final parting thought because I don't know if this is the last question, but it sounds like it. Share your ideas. Life is really short. There's only so much that you can do. Share your ideas. If you really believe in your ideas, you will share them so that others can do them. Because if it's really important, it's important that it happens. It doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be you that gets the credit. Just bring these things out there. That's why one of the reasons why I started my newsletter years ago was like, well, I have all these things. I can only work on one thing at a time. Practically, or maybe a couple of things, but definitely not all the things that my very active brain will muster up. So like, let's get these things out there and maybe someone will pick it up or someone will find inspiration or maybe I'll find a person working on it that can help them along a little bit further or introduce them to someone else who also is thinking about these things and stuff like that. So talk about your ideas. Don't be scared to share them. Really ask yourself, like, am I actually going to do this or not? And most likely you're not. And because you can only do so many things like with your days. I was going to say like your short life, but like that's grim. But a day just has 24 hours is maybe more positively formulated. Even if we're immortal, a day only has 24 hours and there's only so much you can do. But with other people, you can do a lot more. And then you need to share and, cast your ego aside. It's not about you. It's about like the things that you believe in. That's more important.
That's beautiful. That's a huge takeaway there for sure. Yeah. Share your ideas. Yeah. Life is short. Boss, do you have anything to promote? Where can people find you?
Berlin. Bear guy in slow joking. I go by the queue for 3 hours. Twitter, twitter.com/BASGRAS. And you can also go to bas.grasmayer.com for like my bio and like some stuff that I've written and things like that. Lastly, musicx.network. Then you'll find or musicx.substack.com. That's where you'll find, the news I started. I haven't been writing in a while, but my co-editor, called Martin Waldhaven, he is writing and he's very good. The format is we always write a piece, some take on, something music and innovation. And then we have a set of curated links. So even if the piece of the week is not for you, there's always going to be some gem in there, that you're really, that you can learn from and that you can dive into. So, really recommend checking Martin's writing.
Definitely. I love it. I'm a subscriber. So yeah.
And I want to get back in. I took a break and now I'm like, I need to get back into the rhythm of writing. So who knows, maybe by the time, this goes live, I'll be writing. But I don't know. Actually.
I'm looking forward to it.
Music. I want to make music.
You want to make music? Let's make music. Hell yeah. Bas, again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you. Man, yeah. So much appreciation for you and your work. Such a great contributor to our space in general. And yeah, man. Again, thank you. And I will see you on the internet.
Yes, see you on the internet. Thank you.